you worked your way into doing quite a bit of jingle work in Chicago over the years, and I know you've worked with a lot of famous Chicago bluesmen, Texas bluesmen, guys like Buddy Guy and Junior Wells and Albert Collins, and talk about working with some of those guys.
Well, Albert, out of everybody, I thought Albert was the most interesting. And just the cool, he had such a unique style, as you know.
Yeah.
I mean, nobody played like Albert.
Right.
You know, he tuned his guitar differently, he used capos, he didn't use guitar picks.
Right.
I mean, it's just a cool thing.
Yeah,
know?
yeah.
And he just was a different approach. And but yet he sounded like a real solid sort of old school blues guy at the
Right.
same time.
So working with him in the studio, I would assume that he probably didn't read charts.
No.
So how would you work with someone like that on a session? On
Well,
a short
most
jingle?
artists I work with never read charts. I mean, in terms of records, or the only people that read charts were like session musicians, and the only time I used session musicians, on a regular basis was with jingles. But records, that doesn't really happen. You never have charts. If you have charts, you have chord charts.
Right.
That's about it.
Okay.
So that was never that much of an issue. I mean, I was always a feel guy anyway.
Huh, because most of the jingles I've done, or sessions I've sat in on, have been very chart and click track oriented.
I mean, they have to be for timing.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I tried to give as much freedom to the musician as possible. I tried to treat a jingle session like a record session.
Yeah.
I mean, I did have to have charts to a degree.
Sure.
Like it has to end here, it has to
Yeah.
start here, But if it was someone like Albert, I mean, I tried to make it as comfortable for him as possible. And I would purposely put in a vamp so he didn't have to end it, you know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
At a certain beat or whatever.
Sure.
Those guys, there's a funny story with Junior Wells. I was doing a Miller commercial with Junior.
Uh-huh.
And they had revived Welcome to Miller Time.
Okay.
Remember that jingle? Welcome to Miller Time. It's all yours and it's all mine. It was from the 60s.
Okay.
And they revived it in the 90s,
Yeah.
that song.
Uh-huh.
So Junior, first of all, Junior comes in his pajamas to the studio with a hairnet. Hey, man, So he sits down and he starts to sing. I play him the track. He goes, all right, I'm ready. He goes, welcome to Miller's Time. I said, Junior, it's Miller. Okay, man, I got it. I swear to God, Dave, this went on for a half hour. He could not say Miller. He couldn't sing Miller. Every time it was Miller's. Finally, I just told him, look, I'm just going to chop off the S, which is what we did.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, it was almost getting embarrassing.
Yeah.
And it was embarrassing for him, and I just didn't want to embarrass him anymore, so I just said, okay, we got it, Junior, thanks, it was great.
Yeah, yeah.
But he could never say Miller.
Yeah.
He kept saying Millis.
Wow.
With an S.
Somehow I can picture that. And you work with Buddy as well?
Yeah, Buddy, I think it might have been a Kraft commercial or something.
Yeah. I've done a couple of those.
And that was a different experience with Buddy. Buddy, I don't think really wanted to be there, kind of thing. So it was a little bit different. Junior, most of the cats, like Albert was a gas.
Yeah.
Yeah, I worked with BB too on a Coca-Cola commercial, so he was a gas.
Yeah.
But yeah, Buddy was a little bit different. He was okay. He was a nice guy and everything, but I just really didn't want to be there.
Yeah.
And Buddy, I noticed Buddy had a really hard time doing something that he didn't think of. If you were telling him to do something, he had a hard time doing it. And a lot of great sort of musicians are like that.
Yeah.
They only can play from within.
Yeah,
You can't say, do this, and he can't do it.
Yeah.
Even if it's a lick that he knows or something that's natural, you would think would be natural to them. John Martin was the same.
Yeah. Yeah, let's talk about your relationship with John, because I know you're currently working on a tribute record to him.
Yeah.
For those of you who aren't familiar with John Martin, can you give us just a little?
Well, John was the first white artist signed to Island Records. Before John Martin, Island Records just had island music. They had Bob Marley and Tilts and Desmond Decker and artists like that. So Chris Blackwell saw something in John Martin. He might have been 17, 18, something like that, when he got signed. He did his first record in 1967. John was responsible for a lot of things. After John, then I think Chris signed Stevie Winwood. So John was signed before "Give Me Some Lovin'" was a hit. So he'd been around a long time, and John really developed his own sort of style. His big influence was a guy named Davy Graham, who was an English guitarist. But John took all that way further than Davy Graham.
Right.
He had this incredible right hand technique, and percussive, you know. And he was the first guy to ever use an echoplex on record. So that whole tape delay thing, he sort of invented that.
Really?
So the Edge, the style the Edge plays, it's all
yeah.
stems from John Martin. That's where he got it from. You know, that whole repeating rhythmic thing.
Really?
Yeah, John was more known as an acoustic player, but he played great electric guitar. He made many just electric guitar records. He was a fantastic electric guitar player. Anyway, John Martin was probably my favorite artist of all time, next to the Beatles. The Beatles and John Martin when I was a teenager. And I got to work with him. I met him in the late 80s, and I worked with him for about 20 years.
Wow. Yeah. How'd you meet him?
It was kind of set up for me to meet him. I didn't know I was meeting him. I had a company at the time with a guy named Jack Kellman and Doogie Thompson. And Doogie was the bass player from Supertramp. So he and I decided to go to Europe on some business. At the end of the trip, he wanted to bring me to Glasgow because he grew up outside of Glasgow. He wanted to see where he grew up. And I said to him, I said, "Do you know John Martin?" Because John was from Glasgow. And he said, "No, I don't know him, but I know the guy that owns the studio where John does a lot of his recording, which was a place called Sava Studios in Glasgow." So at the end of the trip, we go to the studio. I meet the studio owner. Of course, John's not there, you know. But the studio owner gives me a tour, and he plays me all the outtakes and all this cool shit.
Yeah.
And I was sort of in heaven, you know, listening to all this John Martin music. So after about a couple hours of that, Doogie said, "Well, let's go up. I want to show you the town I grew up in." So Brian Young, the engineer, comes with us. We go up. We go to this little town called Roberton. It's a typical Scottish town where there's, you know, stone walls and sheep walking around and unpaved roads, and it's a town of about 70 people. You know? And he shows me where he grew up. And it turns out, do you know who Hamish Stewart is from the Average White Band?
Yeah, I know the name.
He played guitar in the Average White Band. In the 90s, he played bass with Paul McCartney.
Oh, yeah.
Did all those tours with McCartney.
Yeah.
Well, he grew up in the same town.
Yeah.
So Doogie Thompson from Supertramp and Hamish Stewart grew up in this town of like 70 people. So after we did all that, Doogie says, "Well, let's get something to eat." So we're driving, and we're going down this road, and we see this huge church. And Doogie said, "Pull in to Brian Young, pull in behind the church." So we pull in behind the church, and there's this little cottage, and Doogie says, "Let's come with me." He knocks on the door, and John Martin answers the door. They had it all set up for me to meet John. It turns out he was living in that same town. What are the chances?
Wow.
So I met John, and needless to say, I got pretty drunk with him because John really did like to drink.
Yeah.
And then I didn't see him for about a year. About a year later, he came to New York to play the Bottom Line, and he called me. And he said, "Tools, why don't you fly out to New York and spend a weekend? We can hang." And at the time, I was doing a record here with Cheryl Wilson. And I said, "I'm doing this record." But I said, "John, you know what we're going to do? We're going to cut 2 of your tunes." And I said, "Why don't I fly you here after the weekend, and you can play guitar on these tunes?" And he agreed.
Wow.
And then after that, he asked me to do this record, which became No Little Boy. And then, you know, we just worked together a lot. I didn't do every record from that point on, but I did a lot of stuff with him.
Did you ever write with him?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
But nothing was ever released that we wrote together. Except we wrote a ballet together for the Royal London Ballet. We had to do about 28 minutes worth of music. So he and I wrote that music together and recorded it. And it was performed and everything, but I don't think it was ever released.
Wow.
Quite a guy.
Yeah. Great story.